My name is David Olson. I'm the Director of Education at Retro Report. And the goal for today will be to give you an introduction to Retro Report, what we do as an organization, the resources we provide, and then some possible entry points for how you might use Retro Report in a cornerstone related project. If you're doing the Live Civics connection, if you have one of those grants, or potentially elsewhere in your curricula. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. It's best as an organization that creates media. It's one of those things where it's always good to show rather than to just tell you about this. So the other thing I'll share with you here is that this shortened URL, this bit.ly down here, that will get you this whole presentation. It's open and available for you. It is case sensitive, so the RR and the T on Teagle are all capitalized, but I have some links in there. If you're the kind of person who wants to follow along or wants to open it up and save it for later, any of those are great choices for you. So, like I said, my name is David Olson. I'm the Director of Education. I have a pretty long background and career in education, spanning all sorts of different levels. I've worked in classrooms with students from like 13 to 35, taught middle school, spent the bulk of my career as a high school teacher. I've also taught at the community college level, both last spring and this coming spring. I've served as an adjunct professor in the political science department at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So I understand what all sorts of different classrooms look like across the board, and how hopefully to create some great experiences for students, to engage in critical thinking, to enter into meaningful discussions, and hopefully that will come through with some of the resources that we create at Retro Report. So, if you are unfamiliar with us, Retro Report is a nonprofit, nonpartisan journalism organization. Essentially, what we specialize in is creating short-form documentary films, really with the goal of trying to connect past and present. Our films, like I said, are short. They tend to be in and around 10 minutes, some, maybe a few minutes longer, and definitely some that are shorter than that. And I think that really the hallmark of what we do is we tell stories. We approach this through a narrative lens. What you'll see, and I'll show you an example of a Retro Report film here in just a moment. But really what we do is we try to pair first-person narratives. We want to hear from the people who have lived those experiences and allow them to talk about them. And oftentimes, people from multiple different backgrounds and different experiences. And then couple that with archival footage. We want to know, what did things look, feel, sound like at the time that they were happening. Retro Report's been around for over a decade now, creating short films. We have over 300 films in our website, all of which are entirely free and freely available. They're posted on our YouTube channel, but the easiest way to find stuff is to head to retroreport.org. I'll show you how to find some of those materials here in a little bit. And like I said, we want to focus on that narrative story. We don't create what I would describe as explainer films. They are not a talking head who approaches this as, here's 10 minutes, everything you need to know about X. Really what we want to do is hear stories, gain valuable insights into real people's experiences, and see how that helps us connect historical ideas and events with what's happening in our world today. And I think we do a good job of spanning sort of a wide array of different issues and approaches, which I know with the Cornerstone program, that's really one of the key goals, right? How can we pair key and great texts with helping students understand how they're going to interact with each other, with the environment, with technology, and live in our current world. So really that sort of broad humanities connection. So at Retro Report, some of the things you'll find, and I've provided some examples here to call out for you. Whether you're exploring issues with democracy, debates over immigration, issues of identity and belonging, elections. I know it's real soon. It's only been, believe it or not, it has been a whole week since the presidential election. I'm not sure if it feels like less than that or an eternity, but it's definitely one of those. Plenty of resources to look at human environment interaction, and plenty more. So some examples. Actually, we recently published a 5-part series looking at historic presidential elections, some of these aspects of campaigning and elections that we often see as being very recent, right? That these are new aspects of our political system. But things like negative campaigning, appealing to sort of culture war questions, trying to appeal to the common person and connect with them. These are things that actually have a much longer history. Great film. Actually, we're both last night and tonight for primarily secondary educators. We're doing a great webinar series looking at contemporary indigenous history, and how have indigenous cultures and tribes and peoples both advocated for sovereignty and self-determination. We have this great film that we worked with a professor and filmmaker at the University of Oklahoma to create this film looking at the occupation of Alcatraz in the late 1960s and how that became a catalyst for indigenous activism. This film is one of my favorites. It looks at this question that we often grapple with throughout U.S. history and certainly history of other parts of the globe as well, is how do we treat wartime refugees? How do we make decisions about who gets to come to the United States or immigrate or emigrate elsewhere throughout the world? And here, what we've done is sort of pair stories, one from the end of the Vietnam War and the fall of Saigon, to the end of the war in Afghanistan and the beginning of the war in Ukraine, to see, what goes into that calculus about how we make those decisions. Another great one, if you're looking at issues of elections or issues or problems with democracy, this is another excellent film. It's a really short one. I think this one's only about 5 minutes long. And it looks at the history of voter intimidation and poll watchers. And so here, this gives you just a sense of some of that breadth. Hopefully in a bit, I'll show you some of the depth as well. What I wanted to do was show you an example here, and in conversation with Lonnie about some of the texts that were being used by folks in the Cornerstone program. This was one of a whole bunch of options I could have chose from, but I happen to love this film here. So this one looks at Skinner, B.F. Skinner, and behaviorism, how that translates to our current sort of debate or grappling with how we approach a digital world, and some of the incentives that get us to stay in that digital world. So here I'm going to play for you just about a 3.5, 4 minute clip of this film here.
Conquest, the search for new knowledge about our universe, our world, and ourselves.
What is behavior? What makes a man love, gamble, write a sonnet? In this laboratory, scientists seek answers to those questions using pigeons.
It was 1959, and an unassuming scientist was about to tell the nation about a remarkable discovery.
Dr. Skinner, what are you doing with this pigeon?
I'm getting ready to demonstrate a fundamental principle of behavior. This pigeon is hungry, and I can give it food just by pressing this switch, which operates a small food dish back of the square opening in the wall. In that way, I can select parts of its behavior and make it do practically anything I like.
For decades, behavioral psychologist B.F. Skinner had been experimenting with pigeons and rats to see what he could make them do. But rats pressing levers and pigeons pecking discs was just the start.
If it goes past one pigeon, the other pigeon can eat, and if it goes the other way, the other pigeon eats.
That's remarkable.
Of course, we're not interested in behavior because it's amusing or dramatic. We want to study its causes and find out how to change it.
One of those techniques he found that was particularly useful in shaping behavior was the variable reward.
The things we do in everyday life don't always pay off, and they don't always not pay off. It isn't simple all or none. We study that, in the case of the pigeon, by arranging various schedules or systems of payoff.
He found that if you don't know what is going to come down that chute in terms of a reward, and you don't know when it's going to come, you will stay there pressing the button and pulling the lever.
The key, Skinner discovered, was making the payoff unpredictable.
That element of uncertainty, that perfect sweet spot, that balance of, predictability yet uncertainty, that is the most addicting reinforcement schedule.
To help make his case that humans could be controlled in the same way, Skinner pointed to casinos.
People gamble because of the schedule of the reinforcement that follows.
In Skinner's time, people found a lot of what he said for cultural and historical reasons to be very creepy. The idea that we could be controlled was coming right on the heels of this image of sort of communism, and that we could be all turned into little drones executing the commands of others. And so people were repelled by it.
I come back to the old question, the old objection. Quis custodiet ipsos custodes? Who is going to guard our guardians? Who is going to modify the people who are going to modify us?
In the climate of the 70s, 80s, and even 90s, it would have been a very dubious proposition to call yourself and advertise yourself as a behavior designer.
But that's not the case today.
I'd like to share with you a design pattern that companies use to build habit-forming products. It's called the hook.
I decided to dive deeper into the psychology of what makes products habit-forming, hoping that I could build a habit-forming product.
Nir Ayal now works as a behavioral designer, helping companies figure out what kind of behavioral techniques will attract users and keep them.
What we find is that habit-forming products have what's called a hook designed into the product. If we feel lonely, we check Facebook. If we're uncertain, we Google. All of these things fundamentally cater to an emotional itch, an emotional discomfort. What we want to do is to find the pain points in users' lives so that we can solve that problem for them.
But behavioral design goes beyond simply finding and easing an emotional itch. The hooks built into these products are also intended to keep users coming back. And here, Skinner's discoveries are key.
The connection is to make something interesting, it needs to be variable. There has to be some kind of mystery, some kind of uncertainty. Instagram is a great example of a product that has a fantastic hook built in. The internal trigger is when you're seeking connection. The action is to open the app. The variable reward is to scroll the feed. Over time, you're changing your habits to use this product.
All right, so that's just a selection of that one. I'm not going to lie, prior to joining here, Lonnie and I had a quick tech check and then a little downtime. I was looking at Instagram prior to this to see if there was anything that would scratch my emotional itch to help make that connection. And so maybe you saw this and this was great, and you can see, applications to things you're using in your classroom, texts that you're using. And I think one of those key questions is, why might we actually want to use video as an entry point? My guess is some of the things you've experienced primarily, as an acceleration in the last 5 to 10 years, maybe even more so in this time frame since COVID, is this reluctance to be readers amongst your undergraduate students, that sort of hurdle of how do I get them to actually dig into a text, to analyze it, to help make connections. I'm of the opinion, based on not only my work with Retro Report, but my experience in the classroom at various levels, is that, video like this, again, that's told with a narrative perspective that provides historical background, really can be a powerful tool to get your students to take that next step, right? So here, as I talked with Lonnie, we identified, there are a couple texts that folks do use fairly widely that could fit in here. So whether you're teaching, Plato's Allegory of the Cave, teaching, a very old text, or a very new text like Jenny Odell's How to Do Nothing, which I think, Lonnie, you mentioned, I think some folks at Stanford who are part of the Cornerstone Project might be using that one. And really, these are great ways to try to make this connection of what is it that influences our behavior? How can we recognize what those systems are, what those triggers are? What are the things that get us to actually act in a certain way? And by recognizing that, is there a way to sort of reclaim that autonomy, that agency? So again, here's one example of a way where you might be able to take a 10-minute film, help students connect to a text, but really use it to explore some of those bigger picture questions, but in a way that is relevant to your students, in a way that makes it personal. I think this can be a really powerful tool in trying to help your students make some of those connections. So, as an example, we actually have done some work with both secondary faculty along with some higher ed faculty to actually find some of these pairings that might work for particular texts. So a couple examples, and I can show you this collection and the rest of our sort of broader library of films. But if you're teaching about the Crucible, we have a great film about McCarthyism that's nice and short to provide some of that context. The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. We have a film talking about health disparities where race has historically been a factor. I love this book. If you've used Born a Crime by Trevor Noah, here trying to connect the system of oppression in a place like South Africa, and what does that actually look like when we apply it to the United States in areas of public housing? What reforms have we tried to use to disrupt some of those racial disparities? There's a great connection here. Another one, if you use the Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian, we actually, as I mentioned, we're doing this webinar series looking at contemporary Indigenous history. We have this great film about the Indian Child Welfare Act, about how, after sort of the boarding school system ends in the 1950s through the 60s and 70s, there's a new method of trying to harm and erase Indigenous identity through essentially adopting children out of Indigenous cultures. And so here there's again, another great connection that you can use with your students to provide some of that historical background for them. I sort of went through, some of those areas where you might be looking to make those connections. So if you're looking to address, issues in our democracy, things like looking at gerrymandering, this one I really, really like for a number of different reasons. But one of the chief reasons with this gerrymandering film, so this one actually goes into the issue of racial gerrymandering, right? How do we legally, constitutionally, and otherwise draw lines to determine who represents whom? And one of the things I love about this particular film is we actually have interviews with multiple Black legislators in the state of North Carolina. One, Eva Clayton, a former congresswoman elected in the 1990s, who talks about how using race as one means to drawing districts basically allowed for representation. She was the first African American elected to Congress in more than 100 years, I think, since the Reconstruction period in North Carolina. But then we talked to another state legislator who talked about how by drawing districts where race is a factor, it's her view that it actually harms her ability to adequately represent the people in her district. So there, within one 10-minute film, we get multiple perspectives on different sides of an issue by people who have lived experience in that, and couple it with some of that historical background. So a number of others here that would fit. if you're looking at issues of civil rights and issues of belonging, how we form into groups, how different people advocate within those groups. We have a number of different films, one that looks at the place of transgender people within the broader LGBTQ movement. This is a great one, sort of the beginnings or one of the catalyst events for the Chicano movement and the LA school walkouts in the late 1960s. There's some amazing interviews with students who were active in those protests. That film was actually nominated for an Emmy, and it's one we're really proud of. Some amazing, powerful interviews with that one. And then this one here that looks at the murder of a man named Vincent Chin in Detroit about 40 years ago, and how that event helped push forward and create an Asian American civil rights movement. We know that immigration has been a hot button issue. It is likely to remain a hot button issue for the foreseeable future. In fact, if you look at American history, there are almost no times where it hasn't been a subject of political debate. But here we have a number of different films that help put this in context, whether it's looking at how a proposition in the state of California, which was passed but then deemed unconstitutional, what effects that had on the immigration debate and on politics in the state of California. If you want to provide some of that historical perspective, we can look exactly 100 years ago at the election of 1924 and how immigration, the role of the Ku Klux Klan, those things drove this debate within the Democratic Party about what to do about immigration. Another one, again, that is likely an issue that will come up over the next few years here, the issue of sanctuary cities. And here we look to really the origin of that term, where quite literally sanctuary was being provided by churches and church groups in the Southwest United States, and how that really became the driving force for cities and counties to sort of declare themselves sanctuary cities in different places around the country. So again, I think our strength is in creating films that help provide that historical context, help connect to the experiences and issues and ideas that students might be grappling with in some of the texts that you're having them read. We also have a ton of stuff that looks at different environmental debates. I really love this film, looking at the ozone layer, in part because this is one of those relatively few environmental success stories. One of the other things I really like about it is it highlights a number of different sort of entry points to creating public policy, sort of who's involved in addressing environmental issues. And this one tells the success story of international cooperation when it comes to regulating chlorofluorocarbons and how that's actually led to the healing of the ozone layer. It's a pretty amazing story. So some really great things along the way. No matter sort of what your focus area or entry point is for this, I think we have some great resources. I'll take a minute here just to show you how to navigate our website, where you can find these resources, and how you can utilize them in your classroom. So if you head to retroreport.org, this is the homepage. What you'll find, the easiest way to find our resources, our videos, is if you go here to explore by topic. What you'll find here is the full library. You can, with B.F. Skinner would be proud here, you can sort of endlessly scroll and see if there's something that suits your fancy here, or you can search by subject, you can search by topic, you can search for a keyword here. So the ozone film that I talked about, if I type in ozone, it'll bring me here. If I click on it, it'll bring me to the video page where this is embedded right here from our YouTube channel. One of the other things you'll notice when I played that initial video, I played it with the captions on. I think that's a great practice to get into when using video in your classroom. whether you're, in a 1960s lecture hall and the sound might be a little wonky depending on where you sit, or if you have students for whom English is not their first language, or any sorts of issues, play it with the captions on. Now, you might be saying, Dave, I have tried turning captions on YouTube videos and it doesn't go well. You're right, because YouTube auto caption is hot garbage. But you don't have to worry about that with Retro Report, because we upload our own caption files, so it is correct. It is timed accurately. You can also go and check out the full transcript of any video as well. One of the things I really like about this, since we at Retro Report are journalists at heart, is we cite our sources. So whenever you see archival footage, whenever you are introduced to a new, interview subject, we're going to provide that information right on there, so that, if your students are like, where is this from? When in history is this happening, right? We can go right back to the transcript to find that. We also have a number of ready-to-use lessons and student activities. Those are more geared towards our secondary education audiences, but certainly if you're looking for, what are some of our discussion questions, some of our key ideas that, to give yourself a start, some of this might be great for you as well, right? So looking at what are some of those ways that humans interact with the environment. How can we use data to leverage action to solve social, political, economic problems? This is our one for online all the time here, the one that I showed you, right? So again, we can scroll down and figure out, some of these essential questions. These might be a great starting point to build a discussion within your class. So hopefully there's some things here that piqued your interest. And we'll also give you an opportunity to check this out and play. I'll put the direct link here in the chat to our video library. And at this point, before we get to the Q&A portion, I'd love to be able to answer any questions you have, talk about, potential ways you might see this used in your classroom. Really, our goal is to learn from you. So my hope is that, after meeting with me here today, that you'll go create a free Retro Report account. This allows you to see all of the resources associated with all of the different films. If you scan that QR code, you can, take you 30 seconds to set that up. And I encourage you to go explore, figure out what sort of film resources we have, what are some things that might fit with some different texts that you're using in class. We'd also love to hear from you. Like I said, we do a lot of work in the secondary education space. I've been in this role now for about 3.5 years, and we've really made some significant gains in the number of secondary classrooms that we work with. But we also know that higher ed folks use these videos. They are perfectly suited for higher ed audiences and general audiences as well. But what we'd like to know is, how do you use them? What are films that you use? What texts do you pair them with? These are things we'd frankly love to know. We also, my job, I pride myself on listening to educators. This is how we figure out how to serve education audiences better. So if there are needs that you have, this is something that, in this Q&A portion, I'd love to know. If you're like, hey, we addressed this issue, you can either ask Dave, do you have anything on this? Or it would be great if there was something about this particular historic event or this particular issue in our current society that we could explore. We also are looking for partners, for folks who might want to dive in and decide to use some Retro Report videos. Here, I think this is a great way to help students relate to content, to build that bridge from historical ideas and historical background to those key ideas and thoughts that you might be wanting to address within your classroom. So if you want to partner with us, whether it's, hey, we've got a new cohort of students, or here's where we're shifting for second semester, and you want to work with us to identify some Retro Report films to use, provide us some feedback, let us know how it goes. That would be excellent. And in general, we'd love to build out our higher education community. We go to a lot of different conferences across the country. In fact, in early January, well, we're based in New York City, although I'm joining you from beautiful Madison, Wisconsin here. But we'll be at the American Historical Association conference in New York City right at the beginning of 2025. So if you're there, we'd love to connect with you. We have a panel that we've put together looking at contemporary Indigenous history with some excellent scholars. We'll be in the exhibit hall. We will be one of very few non-publishers. So if you have all the books that you could ever read in, more than one lifetime, and you want to come find some other resources to use in your classroom, come visit me there. That would be outstanding. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I would love to know if there are some questions I can answer. And Lonnie, if you want to bring in, I can introduce the other folks too, the other
Sure.
Retro Report folks.
Sure. I see that there are a couple of raised hands. But if you could direct your questions to the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom screen, I think that'll just help me direct questions to David on behalf of you and on behalf of the audience. So David, just a sort of a general question that was coming to mind for me is, you talked about this. I was hoping you could elaborate a little bit more. Examples from your own practice as a teacher with using videos as an entry point to get students to read the material.
Yeah.
What are some changes that you're noticing with the undergraduates that you've been teaching, for instance, when it comes to reading habits, being prepared for class, and using videos, right, as a means to capture their interest? And then I was hoping, particularly since you teach political science classes, but I think this is true in all kinds of undergraduate contexts, regardless of discipline, how videos can be an entry point to talk about hot button issues.
Absolutely. So
And
yeah.
Be a mode to model respectful discourse.
Absolutely. Those are fantastic questions. Happy to tackle them. So for context, yes, the undergraduate courses that I've taught last spring, I taught Intro to American Government. Was a sort of old school 170 students in a giant lecture hall a couple days a week, trying to learn the basics of American government and politics. And as you suggest, Lonnie, right, sometimes that gets pretty contentious. So number one, in terms of what I have seen with my own students is, there's a reluctance to read. There's the goal of, can I just take it in from what I'm listening to? Can I find some shortcuts and ways around that? And so, as an example, in that course, some of the key texts that we read beyond the textbook are things like, excerpts from John Locke's Second Treatise on Government, the Declaration of Independence. We read a number of sort of landmark Supreme Court cases, or at least excerpts of them. So with those sorts of things, really, what I'm trying to do is help students learn how to break down difficult texts, right? Reading John Locke is not the easiest thing for a 19-year-old to do, right? Especially without much background in it. So how can we break it down? How can we figure out the different segments to be able to analyze? But then how can we make it relevant and important, right? That this really is, it's the key to education, whether, no matter what mode you're operating in. It's, can we help build relevance for students? Can we find ways to help them do that analysis and connect it either to prior knowledge, to personal experience, any of those sorts of things? And I find that using video as a way to do that especially video that's sort of narrative connected, right, is here are real people, right? It immediately puts well, there are personal connections to this, right? There are real humans at the center of all of these different stories. So one example, we have a great film about school prayer, about the Engel versus Vitale Supreme Court decision. And part of that, really, that film opens with an interview with a guy named John Engel, who was a kid when his parents were part of that lawsuit in New York State and ultimately to the US Supreme Court. So hearing the experiences of a person who said, yeah, it was my parents who brought this lawsuit. Here's what the discussions we were having at the dinner table, which led us to sue the state of New York and ultimately end up in front of the Supreme Court. It's those sorts of things where when you focus on the stories of real people as opposed to those abstract ideas, right? There's some power there in making those connections, right? Plato's allegory of the cave is a great text. Can be hard for students to approach, right? Unless you can find ways to say, like, what are the places where we struggle to understand, what it is we actually know, or who might be controlling the information that comes to us, right? So finding those ways to make those personal connections, I think, is essential. And I think to your other point of how do we deal with hot button topics, right? Again, I think finding multiple perspectives on these is an important entry point, right? Now I'm guessing in our Zoom room we have people of multiple political affiliations teaching all sorts of different courses, but I'm guessing with the same end goal in mind in how do we help our students become critical thinkers? How do we aid our students to engage in difficult concepts, ideas, and topics, separate fact from fiction, and come out with the ability to make defensible claims on the other side? And I think the only way to do that is to be able to find ways to hear multiple perspectives and make those decisions. I know this sometimes is a case at the post-secondary level. It's absolutely an issue at the secondary level. I think one of the dangers is when students leave that classroom and say, my teacher or my professor said X, right? When they imparted to me, here is what I ought to believe. Now, I know that this doesn't happen that often in classrooms, that our goal as educators is not to just say, here's what you ought to believe, and there it is, period, end of sentence. But sometimes it gets construed that way. Sometimes by students, certainly by the media, by politicians, by others who may have a political axe to grind. And so I think finding ways to expose students to multiple perspectives, and again, if those multiple perspectives are people who have a lived experience, people who said this happened to me, that helps create some of that separation from, well, my professor said in lecture today, fill in the blank. And finding ways to then connect back to what is the common set of facts that our students can point to? What are the experiences that we can draw from different narratives to be able to have a reasoned discussion about issues like immigration and democracy and the environment and technology, right? These are really important things and skills that we want to cultivate amongst our students. Hopefully that, sometimes I'm long-winded, Lonnie, so hopefully that met our needs here.
That's great. So, David, so one question I see in the Q&A is, what are some responses about Retro Report that you've heard from teachers? So what's been helpful with the teachers you've spoken with? There are some really wonderful examples that you provided in your workshop. Are there other sort of points of feedback that you've heard as well?
Yeah, to be honest, the one of the most common things is where have you been all my life? We generally have good response from educators who want to use retro report materials or who end up using retro report materials in their class. I think the pieces of feedback that we get are uh, it's great to have something that tells a story, right? It's essential to have the personality that comes through, to be able to hear from people who have lived experience in a particular area. Now, sometimes if we're reporting on stuff that happened long ago, we do have to rely on academics, right? Some maybe in the future, some of the marvelous people in this room, right? But we ideally we want to find the people who've lived that history. We also tend to get quite a bit of uh, quite a bit of feedback from professors and from secondary teachers that the length of our films is great. That finding something that's 10 minutes is a great springboard for a discussion. It's a great way to build critical thinking skills, develop empathy for different points of view, all of that. I see my colleague and boss Kira Darton, who was helped create Retro Report. She's chiming in saying, "I'd love to help answer this." So Lonnie, if you can figure out how to let her in, that would be excellent. Kira can also chime in on the origins of Retro Report. That's her wheelhouse as well. But yeah, we generally have a really good response from educators to say, there are great ways to integrate it, whether it's, here's the piece of history or what we're focusing on in a psychology course or a geography course or political science or environmental science. There are great ways to help make those connections. I do see one question about arts advocacy, cultural policy. I will stick in the chat a link to a great film. This one is called When Art Fuels Anger, Who Should Prevail? So this one looks at some of these First Amendment arguments and cultural appropriateness arguments over things in the art world. So one of our sort of historical touchstone here is looking at the controversy over the work from Andres Serrano in the late 1980s titled Piss Christ, where he submerged a crucifix into a jar of his own urine and sort of the outrage and outcry that created. And then connecting that to some more recent battles over the appropriateness of art in the marketplace as well. All right, Kira, can I turn it over to you to provide some historical background of Retro Report?
Yes, I would love that. Retroport was founded 13 years ago now, and I was a producer at 60 Minutes when I met our founder, whose name is Chris Buck, who's a philanthropist whose family foundation does a lot of work in education. And he came to me because a lot of the stories I produced at 60 Minutes had some kind of historical context. It was what I really cared about. And he said, what if we created an organization that looked at news differently? He really believed that the way news was being covered was broken. And so we really began as thinking about a way to reinvent the news. And we partnered initially with the New York Times. Retroport, probably many of you saw those videos. They were like by far the most viewed videos on the New York Times platform. And the idea was to add historical context to news events so that everything wasn't this race for the 24-hour news coverage, little bits and starts. But from the very beginning, we heard from teachers who said, these are amazing. They're perfect for the classroom. They're really engaging my students. And we said, well, now we're going to go off and do a PBS show or do a project with, NBC News. And we really were thinking of ourselves only as an antidote to some of the news problems. And then the pandemic hit. And it went from a few emails to dozens of emails from educators saying, can you help? We really need some resources to help us in this moment when there were all the flipped classrooms and kids all of a sudden all had Chromebooks. These were largely high school teachers. And so we hired Dave, and really the rest is history. He has completely expanded our reach. We have 30,000 high school teachers a month using us, and we've done all sorts of different collaborations with universities for screenings, for events, for conversations. And I think we really were so drawn to the Cornerstone and Live Civics program because part of what we're seeing in the country and what we're seeing from working with students is that they don't appreciate the value of journalism as well as history, right? And one of the things that always strikes me when we visit classrooms is that students say, we don't like the media, they tell us what to think, but we love Retro Report because we hear different perspectives and facts, and it's laid out, and they really describe what is reporting, basic reporting, or the way that I have always thought of reporting. So I think the idea that we can have a common set of facts, a common groundwork that we can ask these questions from is really important for high school students, for freshmen. And one of the things I'd love to ask all of you to think about is we've been thinking a lot about, is there value to us almost thinking of a freshman seminar for incoming students around what are the modern moments in modern US history that students really need to understand to become better thinkers, citizens in college. So, I think Dave's email was there somewhere, but if that's something you think we should work on, we would love to hear that feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, our sort of takeaway from this, or our ask of you is, please explore our collection. I put the link in there again to just set up the free account to register. Again, that's the easiest way to see all of the resources we have. But we would love to find some folks who are interested in diving in, finding ways to use video with classrooms, and to make that work. And again, it's something we're happy to work with you folks on. We would love to get feedback on what Retro Report materials you use, how you use them, what impacts they make with your students.
And I think Dave said this, but I saw a question as well. Everything is free. We are still lucky enough to receive funding from the philanthropists who launched us, but we also get grants and private individuals who support us. We also do a number of big TV projects every year, so we get co-production revenue from those. So we just had a big PBS show that I encourage everybody to go watch called Citizen Nation, where we followed high school students through the national civics competition, We the People. We embedded filmmakers all across the country, and then Dave and his team also produced some really amazing civic skills resources for educators to go along with that. So that's kind of how we can do the work we do, but we really rely on teachers and professors to help us focus on the areas that they need the most.
Absolutely. So if there are folks who if part of your thinking about this is, I would love if there was a 10-minute film on issue X, or historical event, or here's something I use in my classroom that I would love to know if there was something available for, that would be spectacular. Diane, I see your question in the Q&A. Can you access the recent Retro Report piece on the website? Yes, I just put it in the chat. The direct link there that'll get you to, it was a 4-episode docuseries that aired in October on PBS. It's an absolutely fantastic show. So yeah, check it out, called Citizen Nation.
Well, I was just thinking, Kyra, since we have you live on our webinar, could you just say a little bit more about how long it takes to put together the documentaries that you made available through your website? I mean, it's just clear that there's an incredible amount of research that goes into making them. And so I think it'd just be interesting for attendees to hear, start to finish, roughly how long it takes for a video to be conceptualized and then made.
Yes, I would say way too long, but you know, we do really care. We think in some ways, you know, if journalism is the first draft of history, then we'd like to think we're the second or the third draft. So we usually, once we have an idea that we've signed off on, we usually producers will, and reporters will usually spend you know, about 4 to 6 months on a 10 to 12-minute film, which is, you know, really an enormous amount of time. What they do is they reach out to every single participant or descendant of the people who are involved in the original story. They get all the primary source documents, thousands and thousands of pages. Sometimes they'll still be doing FOIA requests, and they'll get everything they can to really, all the archival footage, to really try to have a sense of what happened and who should speak. So after they've pre-interviewed dozens of people, they'll pick, you know, usually between 3 to 5 people that they feel are essential to interview on camera. Then they'll travel the world with a camera person to film the interviews. They'll continue to gather documents and additional resources as they go. And then we pair these journalists, their background is always journalism, with documentary film style editors, because I think it's a really good mix to have the fact checking and skills of a reporter paired with somebody from the documentary film world who's a little bit more focused on visuals and storytelling. And so that whole process happens, and they'll screen it for me, and I'll often give them notes. And then we have a really extensive outside fact-checking process, much more robust than certainly even than 60 Minutes, where I came from, where an outside fact checker will come and review every single piece of footage, every single fact, and we'll have these very long fact-checking meetings. The pages, you know, the charts that the fact checker puts together working with the producer are sometimes, you know, 80 pages. I had dreams that somebody would want these charts, and maybe maybe there will at some point be a use for them, but so far this is just all the work that goes in, so that when you see a 10-minute video, you know that every single word, every single image has been vetted, has been thought about. You know, often you're summarizing decades of policy in a clause. And so, you know, we're really, really thoughtful, and it involves a lot of work to just to make sure that we feel we've gotten it as close to the truth that we possibly can.
Thank you, Kyra. That's incredible. Well, there was a good question that was posted in the Q&A, and David, I see that you responded, you know, using the Q&A, but it seems worth also just sharing the attendees on how faculty can partner with Retro Report.
Yeah, absolutely. So the best answer is we are open. So if folks would like to engage in a partnership where we work together, where we can make suggestions to you about things to use, figure out, you know, how to use them, how to get feedback, all of that, that's something we would love to do. So if there are folks who are interested in a more formal partnership of saying, yep, let's try to dive in and figure out how to use some video resources, that's great. Please email me. I think it's been shared a couple times here, but it's dolson@retroreport.com. I'm Olson. I'm the Norwegian variety. So you can feel free to email me about that. If it's the kind of thing where you're like, I want to go explore, find stuff, and tell you what I use later on, Dave, that's also great. Again, we're eager to continue to get feedback from educators at all levels here in all sorts of different disciplines to figure out what works in your classroom, and help us figure out how to continue to serve you. So you know, it's one of the reasons I love being in this position is I don't have to sell anything, and I get to help contribute to great resources that can be used in classrooms all over the place, teaching all sorts of different things. So to have, been in the classroom and still am in the classroom a little bit, but to go from that to finding ways to support educators, to help create materials that are going to work with students and support, those critical thinking skills, developing media literacy, historical literacy, and more. It's really a treat to do so. So we'd love to hear from you, whether it's for a formal partnership and designing something together, or something less than that. We're open to it all.
Well, thank you so much, David. That was so helpful. I think that your workshop is going to give our attendees just a lot of ideas for how to just draw students into the readings that they are assigning in their classes, whether their text is touching on immigration, whether it's touching on issues of democracy, whether it's an example of Asian American literature, or Chicano literature. I just think there are many, many entry points with the breadth of videos that you offer. And I think, for everyone who's here, this workshop is going to be made available online on TEGL's website. So the recording will just be an additional resource that you should feel free to share with your colleagues. David, any parting words that you'd like to share with our attendees before we transition to today?
Absolutely. I'd like to thank you, Lonnie, for inviting us. I know we've had, a couple discussions and conversations on the way of what's the best way to reach this group. So I really appreciate the opportunity. And again, folks, please check out our library, see if there are things that fit. Reach out to me. We would be happy to find ways to work together and expand our reach into more classrooms across the country. So that's ultimately our goal in creating what we think are really high quality and very free resources for folks to use. So please be in touch, and thank you so much for your time.